They called her Grandma when they thought she couldn't hear. Dr. Preston Sterling, St. Jude's golden boy with the senator father and the Harvard pedigree, made it a game. $500 that the dumpy middle-aged nurse with the shaky hands wouldn't survive her first month at the elite trauma center. She was too slow, too careful, too old for the cutting-edge world of Tier 1 military medicine. But the mockery died the night the code black alarm screamed through the corridors and a critically wounded SEAL team crashed through those doors. Because when Commander Jack Reynolds fought through the fog of blood loss and impending death, he didn't reach for the chief of surgery. He didn't call for the brilliant young residents. His eyes locked on the quiet woman they'd been using as a glorified janitor. And when he forced his shattered body upright and raised a trembling hand to his brow in salute, what happened next didn't just silence the room. It destroyed careers. The fluorescent lights of St. Jude's elite trauma center hummed with surgical precision, illuminating chrome and glass that screamed money and prestige. This was a hospital for the best of the best, where trauma surgeons weren't just doctors, they were artists of emergency medicine, wielding scalpels like conductors' batons. And then there was Sarah Miller. She stood at the supply cart in Bay 4, methodically checking 4 expiration dates for the third time that shift. At 52, with gray-streaked hair pulled into an unflattering bun and scrubs that hung loose on her tired frame, she looked like someone's aunt who'd wandered into the wrong building. She moved with a deliberate, plodding precision that made the caffeinated residents want to scream. Miller. Dr. Sterling's voice cut across the bay, sharp and dismissive. He didn't bother looking up from his tablet. Those bags expired yet. Or are you just enjoying the view? They're fine, doctor, Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying a rasp like old smoke. Check them again. Sterling smirked at the nurse beside him. Brittany, all glossy lips and designer scrubs. Can't have Grandma's shaky hands mixing up the dates. One lawsuit, and HR will actually have to admit their diversity hire experiment failed. Brittany's giggle was sharp as breaking glass. Sarah's hands, yes, they trembled slightly. A rhythmic quiver she couldn't quite control, tightened on the saline bag until her knuckles went white. She'd been at St. Jude's 3 weeks. 3 weeks of being treated like a relic, a charity case, something to be tolerated until she quit or died or simply faded into the walls. She turned away, heading for the break room, each step measured and controlled. Just keep your head down, she told herself, rubbing the knee that still ached when the weather changed. You need this pension. You need the quiet. Then the alarm shrieked. That specific two-tone wail that turned blood to ice. Code black. Mass casualty. Special operations. ETA 2 minutes. The hospital transformed instantly. The casual cruelty evaporated, replaced by controlled chaos. All right, people, this is it. Sterling's voice boomed with command authority. Incoming from Andrews, SEAL team, botched extraction, high-velocity trauma, possible blast injuries. His eyes swept past Sarah like she was furniture. Miller, stay out of the way. Go manage the waiting room or something. I don't want you passing out when the real work starts. I'm trauma certified, Sarah began, her voice carrying an edge that made Sterling's eyes narrow. I don't care what expired certificate you have from some Nebraska cornfield clinic, he snapped. This is Tier 1 military trauma. Stay out of the way. Sarah felt something old and dangerous stir in her chest, the part of her she'd buried, the part that had earned a nickname whispered in field hospital from Kandahar to Ramadi. She stepped back against the wall, made herself small, made herself invisible. The doors exploded inward. The noise hit like a physical force, shouting medics, rattling gurneys, the copper iron stench of fresh blood flooding the sterile air. Male, 20s, multiple GSWs to abdomen. Blast amputation, left leg, tourniquet time, 43 minutes. And then, surrounded by MPs and flight medics, the center of the storm. A gurney carrying a man who looked like he'd been carved from stone and then shattered. Commander Jack Reynolds, tactical vest cut away, torso a mess of gauze and arterial blood, neck wound weeping dark fluid. BP 70 over 40 and dropping. This is the HVT. We lose him, We lose the entire unit's command structure. Sterling was on him immediately, barking orders, preparing for intubation. Sarah stayed pressed against the wall, watching, and she saw what they were missing. The way the blood pulsed from the neck wound, dark, venous, secondary. But the chest. The chest was the real killer. She took half a step forward. Her hands, despite the tremor, were suddenly perfectly still. What happens in the next 47 seconds will make Drive Sterling wish he'd never learned her name. The commander's chest is collapsing. Sterling's hands are moving toward the wrong wound. And Sarah Miller, the woman they called Grandma, the nurse they treated like a janitor, is about to do something that will either save a legend or end her career forever. Hit subscribe right now, or you'll miss the moment that made a room full of doctors fall silent. Drop your country in the comments. Let's see how far this story reaches. Because what Sarah does next, they don't teach it in medical school. They teach it in war. Sarah's first week at St. Jude's had taught her one thing. Invisibility was a survival skill. She perfected it. The art of standing in corners, of moving through hallways like smoke, of answering questions with as few syllables as possible. It was easier that way. Easier than explaining why a nurse with 30 years of experience was willing to take night shifts, restocking catheters, and emptying bedpans. Dr. Sterling made sure she earned every indignity. He'd assign her to clean isolation rooms after C. diff cases. He'd page her to Bay 3 just to have her stand there holding a tray while he flirted with pharmaceutical reps. Once, he made her recount an entire medication cart because he claimed one Tylenol was missing. She'd recounted it 3 times. Nothing was missing. He knew it. She knew it. The audience of residents watching from a nurse's station knew it too. Miller's got that 1,000-yard stare, Dr. Cole had said one night, loud enough for her to hear. Like she'd seen some shit. Probably just the horrors of her ex-husband's hair plugs. The residents had laughed, even the kind ones. The ones who sometimes said thank you when she handed them charts. Because mocking Sarah Miller was the cost of admission to Sterling's inner circle, and Sterling controlled everything, schedules, recommendations, who got invited to journal clubs at his father's country estate. Sarah had absorbed it all with the same blank expression she wore while checking vitals. But late at night, alone in her studio apartment that smelled like industrial cleaner and sadness, she'd stare at the locked drawer in her closet, the one that held her field jacket, the medals, the commendation letters with stamps from places that officially didn't exist. Some nights, her hands didn't shake at all. Those were the nights that scared her most, because those were the nights she remembered what she'd been, what she could still be, what she'd buried under polyester scrubs and the smell of hospital-grade disinfectant. The ghost didn't retire. She just learned to hide. The code black alarm tore through the hospital like a scream in a cathedral. Sarah had been restocking trauma bay supplies when the klaxons hit, that distinctive two-tone wail that meant one thing. Warriors were coming home broken. Her hand stopped shaking immediately. Sterling burst through the double doors, white coat billowing behind him like a cape. Listen up. We have inbound from Andrews, SEAL team, failed extraction in God knows where. Multiple GSWs, potential blast injuries, the whole nightmare package. His eyes were electric with the kind of adrenaline that came from ego, not experience. This was his moment. His stage. Brittany called blood bank. Cole, prep Bay 1 for thoracotomy. Jenkins, get anesthesia down here now. Then his gaze landed on Sarah, who stood near the crash cart, one hand resting on the defibrillator like she was touching something sacred. Miller. Sterling's voice dropped into condescension. This is Tier 1 trauma, not a nursing home. I need you to go to the waiting room and keep the families calm. Bring them coffee. Hold their hands. Do the grandmother thing you're good at. I'm certified for mass casualty, Sarah started, her voice carrying an edge that made Sterling's jaw tighten. I don't care what expired certificate you bought online, he snapped. When those doors open, you'll see things your rural clinic brain can't process. Blood. Real blood. Organs. Chaos. I can't have you fainting or freezing or whatever old nurses do when they get overwhelmed. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. Stay out of my trauma bay. That's an order. The residents watched the exchange with barely hidden smirks. Sarah felt something cold and familiar settle into her spine, the thing she'd been suppressing for 3 years. The part of her that didn't take orders. The part that gave them. But she nodded, stepped back, made herself small again. Sterling turned away, already barking new orders, already forgetting she existed. Sarah moved to the corner near the scrub sinks, positioning herself where she could see everything, where she could watch. Her trembling hands gripped the edge of the counter, and for just a moment, her reflection in the stainless steel looked like someone else entirely. Someone younger. Someone in desert camo with blood on her hands and fire in her eyes. Then the ambulance bay doors exploded inward, and hell came with them. The noise was a physical assault. Metal scraping tile. Voices overlapping into incomprehensible chaos. The smell hit next. Copper and cordite and something darker. The smell of a body pushed past its limits. 3 gurneys crashed through simultaneously. Paramedics and flight medics shouting vitals that painted pictures of catastrophe. Male, mid-20s, multiple GSWs to abdomen, BP 60 over palp. Blast amputation below the knee. Tourniquet time 52 minutes, he's shocky. But the 3rd gurney commanded the room's gravity. 4 MPs surrounded it like a protective wall, their faces carved from stone and exhaustion. The flight medic riding alongside was doing chest compressions with mechanical precision, his voice cracking with desperation. Commander Jack Reynolds, unit leader, 34 years old. Sniper, round upper right thorax, shrapnel to the neck. We lost his pulse twice in transport. BP is 70 over 40. He's circling the drain, and we are out of miracles. Sterling was on him like a hawk on prey. The commander was a monument of a man, even in collapse. 6'3", 220 of muscle and scar tissue. His tactical vest cut away to reveal a torso that looked like it had been through a wood chipper. Blood soaked through the gauze packed against his neck, dark and pulsing. "Get into Bay 1 now," Sterling shouted, his hands already moving, assessing. "I need a thoracotomy tray, 6 units ONEG, and somebody page Cardiothoracic." Sarah watched from her corner, and everything slowed down. It was a thing that used to happen in the field, that crystalline focus where the chaos fell away and only the critical details remained. She saw the neck wound, dark blood, venous, steady flow. Secondary, painful but manageable. Then she saw the chest, the way it wasn't moving symmetrically, the way the right side seemed fuller, distended, the way Reynolds' lips were turning blue despite the oxygen mask. "Tension pneumothorax," she whispered to no one. Sterling was barking orders, focused entirely on the neck wound, trying to visualize the vascular damage. He had Reynolds' head turned, probing for the entry trajectory, completely missing the real killer. "Gimme vascular clamps. This bleeder is arterial. We need to—" "Doctor," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the noise with a tone that didn't belong to the woman they'd been mocking. "His chest." "I said stay out of the way, Miller." Sterling didn't even look at her. "Cole, retraction here. I need to see if this hit the carotid." Commander Reynolds' oxygen saturation dropped to 82, then 79. His chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow movements that weren't moving air. Sarah could see it from 15 feet away. The tracheal deviation, subtle, but there. The distended jugular veins. The paradoxical chest movement. His right lung had collapsed. The pressure was building in his chest cavity, crushing his heart, cutting off return blood flow to his brain. In 90 seconds, maybe less, his heart would stop, and it wouldn't start again. Sterling was still working on the neck, oblivious, playing hero in his own medical drama while his patient died. Sarah's hands stopped shaking completely. She took one step forward. Sarah moved like water through the chaos, her body remembering what her mind had tried to forget. She crossed the 15 feet to the gurney in 4 strides, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. "Step back." It wasn't a request. It wasn't even loud. But the tone, that particular register of absolute command that came from spending years making life-or-death decisions in the dark, made Dr. Cole actually flinch and move sideways without thinking. Sterling's head snapped up. What the hell do you think you're? Tension pneumothorax. Right side, Sarah said, her hands already moving, already reaching past him for the crash cart. His trachea is deviated, JVD is present, and his sats are dropping because you're working on the wrong wound. You have maybe 60 seconds before his heart stops. I'm the attending physician here, and I'm telling you to... Sarah's elbow found Sterling's sternum. Not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to move him bodily out of her way. The sheer audacity of it froze the room for half a second. The residents stared. The MPs tensed. Even the patient on the gurney seemed to hold what little breath he had. Betadine, Sarah snapped at Brittany, who stood paralyzed. Now, and someone give me a 14-gauge angiocath. Her hands were already palpating Reynolds' chest, finding the second intercostal space at the midclavicular line with the kind of precision that came from doing it in the dark, in sandstorms, while people were shooting at you. Sterling grabbed her wrist. You don't have the authority. Sarah looked at him then, and he saw something in her eyes that made his hand fall away. Something cold. Something that had seen worse things than his ego. I'm not asking for permission, doctor. She found the landmark. Drew the betadine swab across Reynolds' chest in one smooth line. Brittany's shaking hand held out the angiocath, and Sarah took it without looking. Her entire focus narrowed to a point smaller than a dime. You do this without imaging, without supervision. You'll never work again, Sterling hissed. Then I won't work again. She drove the needle into Reynolds' chest at a 45-degree angle. There was resistance, skin, muscle, intercostal tissue, and then a sudden give as the tip punched through the parietal pleura and into the pressurized space beyond. The rush of air was audible. A hissing sound like a tire deflating, except this tire was a man's chest cavity. The trapped air that had been crushing his heart and collapsing his vena cava came screaming out through the catheter hub in a violent decompression. Reynolds gasped. His chest expanded. The monitor above his head, which had been screaming alarms, suddenly steadied. Oxygen saturation climbed from 76 to 81 to 87 to 92. Sarah withdrew the needle, left the plastic catheter in place, and taped it down with the kind of field-expedient efficiency that came from treating gunshot wounds in the back of moving Humvees. The room was silent except for the steady beep of the monitor and the sound of Reynolds breathing, ragged but breathing. Sterling stood there, his mouth open, his hand still holding the instruments he'd been using on the neck wound that wasn't killing anyone. Sarah stepped back, her scrubs now marked with blood, and looked at the chief resident with an expression that was neither triumphant nor apologetic. Just tired. You're welcome, she said quietly. Now you can work on his neck. The hospital board conference room smelled like furniture polish and institutional power. Sarah sat in a chair that was too low, deliberately designed to make the person sitting in it feel small. Across from her, behind a mahogany table that probably cost more than her annual salary, sat 5 administrators in expensive suits and Dr. Preston Sterling, who looked like he'd just won the lottery. Mrs. Miller, the chief medical officer, began, his voice carrying the practiced disappointment of a man who'd fired people before. What you did tonight was not heroic. It was reckless, dangerous, and in direct violation of hospital protocol. I saved a man's life, Sarah said evenly. You physically assaulted the chief resident, Sterling interjected, leaning forward like a prosecutor who'd cornered his prey. You performed an invasive procedure without authorization, without imaging confirmation, without proper supervision. You violated the chain of command. You violated patient safety protocols. You violated the Hippocratic Oath. Sarah's voice was quiet but sharp. First, do no harm, because that's what you were doing, doctor. Harm. That man had maybe a minute left before his heart stopped, and you were so focused on playing hero that you missed it. The CMO held up a hand. The outcome is irrelevant. Tell that to Commander Reynolds. The outcome, the CMO continued, his voice hardening, is irrelevant to the fact that you violated hospital policy. We have procedures for a reason, Mrs. Miller. Procedures that protect patients and staff. You don't get to decide which rules apply to you. He opened a folder, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and slid it across the table. Effective immediately, You are terminated for gross misconduct. You will surrender your badge, empty your locker, and leave the premises within the hour. Sarah stared at the termination letter. The words blurred slightly. She'd known this was coming. Had known it the second she'd elbowed Sterling aside. But knowing didn't make it easier. Furthermore, Sterling added, his voice dripping with satisfaction, I filed a formal complaint with the Virginia Board of Nursing. Assault on medical staff, unauthorized invasive procedures, gross negligence. By the time I'm done, you won't be able to work as a nurse anywhere in this country. Sarah looked up at him then, and for just a moment, Sterling felt that same cold thing he'd seen in the trauma bay. Something that made him want to lean back in his chair. Are we done here? Sarah asked. We're done, the CMO said. Security will escort you to collect your things. Sarah stood. She didn't argue, didn't plead. She just nodded once and walked out of the room with the same quiet dignity she'd carried for 3 weeks. The dignity of someone who'd learned to survive by becoming invisible. Behind her, Sterling smiled. The rain started as Sarah waited at the bus stop, the kind of cold January rain that felt personal. She stood under the inadequate shelter with a cardboard box tucked under one arm, the firebox containing a spare pair of scrubs, a coffee mug someone had given her for Christmas 3 years ago, and a plant that was already dying. The city bus arrived 20 minutes late, nearly empty. Sarah climbed aboard, paid her fare, and took a seat near the back. Through the rain-streaked window, she could see St. Jude's lit up like a cathedral, all glass and steel, and the kind of money that could erase people like her without even noticing. She was nobody again. That's what she'd wanted, wasn't it? Anonymity. Quiet. A pension and a small apartment, and a life where nobody asked questions about the scars on her back or why she sometimes woke up at 3 a.m. reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. The bus lurched forward. Sarah closed her eyes and let her head rest against the cold window. She'd saved a man's life tonight. Commander Jack Reynolds would go home to his family, would lead his men again, would have birthdays and Christmases and grandchildren. And she'd be on a bus in the rain with a dying plant and no job. Fair trade, she thought. She'd make the same choice again. The bus stopped at a red light. Sarah opened her eyes and saw her reflection in the window. Gray hair, tired eyes, a woman who looked like she'd given up. Maybe she had. Maybe that was okay. Then she heard the sirens. Not an ambulance. Not a police car. Multiple vehicles, moving fast, the sound getting closer. The bus driver muttered something under his breath. Sarah turned to look out the front windshield. 3 black SUVs with government plates were blocking the intersection. Men in dark suits and tactical gear were emerging, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that came from extensive training. One of them approached the bus, held up credentials that made the driver's face go pale. The door hissed open, and General Thomas Mitchell stepped aboard. He was 63, with steel-gray hair and a chest full of medals visible under his open overcoat. He swept the bus with the gaze of someone who'd spent 40 years evaluating threats and assets. When his eyes found Sarah in the back, his expression softened into something that might have been relief. Lieutenant Colonel Miller, he said, his voice carrying that particular command authority that made everyone on the bus sit up straighter. I'm going to need you to come with me, ma'am. Sarah stared at him. General Mitchell? The same. He walked down the aisle, ignoring the stunned passengers. When he reached her seat, he gestured to the cardboard box. Is that everything? Sir, I don't understand. Commander Reynolds is awake, Mitchell said, and he's asking for you. Actually, he's demanding to see you. You know how SEALs are, stubborn as hell. He glanced at the dying plant in her box. Leave that. We'll get you a better one. General, I was fired. I'm aware. Mitchell's expression hardened. I'm also aware that you saved the life of one of my best operators while Senator's son played with his ego. So here's what's going to happen, Lieutenant Colonel. You're going to come with me back to St. Jude's. You're going to let me fix this. And then you're going to tell me why the ghost medic has been hiding as a night shift nurse for 3 years. The bus had gone completely silent. Every passenger was staring. The driver had his phone out, probably recording. Sarah looked down at the box in her lap. The plant. The coffee mug. The life she tried to build out of invisibility and quiet surrender. Then she looked at the general and saw something she hadn't seen in a long time. Respect. Recognition. The acknowledgement that she was someone worth retrieving. "All right," she said quietly. "Let's go fix this. Stop right here." What General Mitchell is about to do to Dr. Sterling will make you understand why you never underestimate the quiet ones. The confrontation that's coming will be talked about in medical circles for years. If you're not subscribed, do it now, because the next 3 minutes will be absolutely legendary. Drop your country below, and let's see this go global. The St. Jude's lobby had never seen anything like this. General Mitchell walked through the automatic doors with Sarah Miller at his side, flanked by 4 MPs in dress uniforms and 2 men in suits who had defense intelligence written all over them. Sarah was wearing her old field jacket now, the one Mitchell had retrieved from his vehicle, desert tan, faded, with a unit patch she hadn't seen in 3 years and a name tape that read Miller's. LT-SOL. The night shift staff froze. Visitors stared. Someone's phone camera flashed. "Give me the chief medical officer," Mitchell said to the receptionist, his voice carrying across the marble lobby. "And Dr. Preston Sterling. Tell them they have 5 minutes to get down here, or I'll go find them myself." The receptionist, a woman in her 50s who'd seen everything the ER could throw at her, took one look at the general's face and picked up the phone without a word. They arrived in 4 minutes. The CMO, still in his suit from the termination hearing, looking confused and irritated. And Sterling, who went pale the moment he saw Sarah standing there in her field jacket with a 2-star general beside her. "General Mitchell," the CMO began, extending his hand with that practiced administrator smile. "I'm Dr. Carlson, Chief Medical." "I don't care who you are," Mitchell said, ignoring the hand. "I care that you fired the woman who saved Commander Reynolds' life. I care that you did it to protect the ego of an incompetent resident who nearly killed one of my operators." "Now wait just a minute," Sterling started. Mitchell turned on him, and Sterling actually stepped back. "You'll speak when spoken to, Doctor. Right now, you'll shut up and listen." He pulled out a tablet, tapped the screen, and turned it toward the CMO. "This is the telemetry data from Commander Reynolds' trauma bay. Every vital sign, every monitor reading, time-stamped and recorded. At 21:47, his oxygen saturation was 79% and dropping. At 21:48, his blood pressure was 65/38. Tracheal deviation was visible on the ultrasound that your team didn't bother to check." The CMO's face had gone from irritated to pale. At 21:49, Mitchell continued, his voice like gravel. "Lieutenant Colonel Miller identified a tension pneumothorax that your chief resident missed. She performed a needle decompression that re-established cardiac output and prevented imminent cardiac arrest. By 21:50, Commander Reynolds' SAT was 92%, and his BP was stabilizing." He lowered the tablet. "So explain to me, Doctor, why the person who saved my operator's life was fired while the incompetent jackass who nearly killed him is still employed." "Sir, there are protocols," the CMO stammered. "Protocols?" Mitchell's voice rose, and several people in the lobby turned to watch. "Commander Reynolds had 90 seconds before his heart stopped. Your protocols would have killed him. This woman," he gestured to Sarah, "prevented that death using skills she learned in field hospitals in Kandahar, Ramadi, and places your protocols have never heard of." Sterling found his voice, though it came out shakier than he probably intended. "She assaulted me. She violated. She moved you out of the way because you were too stupid to realize you were working on the wrong injury," Mitchell snapped. "And before you mention your father, Dr. Sterling, let me be very clear. I've already spoken with Senator Sterling. I've explained the situation, and I've explained what will happen if you push this any further." Sterling's face drained of color. "You spoke to my father?" "I did. He's not pleased." Mitchell's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Turns out senators don't like their sons being responsible for the near death of a SEAL commander. Bad optics, especially in an election year. The lobby had gone completely silent. 2 nurses were filming on their phones. A janitor had stopped mid-mop to watch. Mitchell turned back to the CMO. "Here's what's going to happen. Lieutenant Colonel Miller's termination will be rescinded immediately. She will be offered a position as Director of Trauma Training, with full authority to reform your residency program. Dr. Sterling will be placed on immediate suspension pending a full review of his clinical competence." He paused, And if either of you have a problem with any of that, I'll make one phone call to the Secretary of Defense and have this hospital's military contract pulled. All of it. Every dime. You can't, the CMO started. I can't, Mitchell said simply. And I will. St. Jude's receives $43 million annually in DoD funding from military trauma care. That money goes away if I say it goes away. So I'll ask you again, Dr. Carlson, do we have a problem? The CMO looked at Sterling, then at Sarah, then at the general. His jaw worked like he was chewing glass. Finally, he shook his head. No problem, General. We'll make the necessary adjustments. Good. Mitchell turned to Sterling, who looked like he might be sick. You're done here, Doctor. Security will escort you to collect your things. If I ever hear that you've retaliated against Lieutenant Colonel Miller in any way, if you've so much as sent her a nasty email, I will personally ensure that every hospital in this country knows what happened tonight. Do we understand each other? Sterling's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. He just nodded. Security, Mitchell called, and 2 guards materialized as if summoned. Please escort Dr. Sterling to his locker. Make sure he doesn't touch anything he shouldn't. They led him away. The golden boy, the senator's son, the man who'd made a sport of humiliating Sarah for 3 weeks, walked across the lobby with his head down while phones recorded his disgrace. Sarah watched him go and felt nothing. No triumph. No satisfaction. Just exhaustion. Lieutenant Colonel, Mitchell said quietly, there's someone who wants to see you. Commander Jack Reynolds was sitting up in his ICU bed despite the protests of 3 different nurses. He had tubes running from both arms, a chest tube visible under his hospital gown, and a neck bandage that made him look like he'd fought a tiger and barely won. But his eyes were clear, and when Sarah walked in, something in his expression shifted into recognition. You, he said, his voice raspy from intubation. The nurse. The one who... He paused, swallowed. The one who saved my life. I just did my job, Commander, Sarah said. Bullshit. Reynolds tried to push himself further upright and winced. I was combat medic before I went through BUD/S. I know what you did. I know what I felt. My chest was... He gestured vaguely. It was like drowning in air. And then you were there, and you fixed it, and Sterling wanted to stop you, but he made a shoving gesture that pulled at his fore. You moved him like he was a kid. One of the MPs, standing guard at the door, grinned. The general tells me you're Ghost, Reynolds continued. The Ghost medic. The legend who saved half of Devgru in Ramadi back in 12. Sarah's jaw tightened. That was a long time ago. Not long enough that I don't remember, Reynolds said. I was there, ma'am. I was a boot lieutenant fresh out of BUD/S, and you pulled 3 of my teammates out of a burning vehicle under small arms fire. You did a field transfusion using your own blood because we were out of ONEG. You kept us alive for 43 minutes until the extract bird arrived. His eyes were bright. I never got to thank you. Sarah felt something crack in her chest, something she'd been holding closed for 3 years. You don't need to thank me, Commander. Yeah, I do. And then, despite the pain it obviously cost him, despite the tubes and the monitors and the nurses trying to stop him, Commander Jack Reynolds swung his legs over the side of the bed and forced himself to stand. Commander, you shouldn't. One of the nurses started. Ma'am, Reynolds said, looking directly at Sarah. Permission to render honors. Sarah's breath caught. Commander, you're injured. Permission to render honors, he repeated, louder this time. Sarah stood there in her old field jacket, in the ICU that smelled like antiseptic and second chances, and she saw in Reynolds' eyes the thing she'd been missing for 3 years. Purpose. Recognition. The acknowledgement that what she'd done, what she'd sacrificed, had mattered. Permission granted, she whispered. Commander Jack Reynolds, wounded warrior, SEAL Team Commander, the man who'd nearly died on a gurney while doctors mocked the woman who'd save him, raised his hand to his brow in a perfect military salute. The ICU went silent. The nurses stopped what they were doing. The MPs came to attention. General Mitchell stood in the doorway with something that might have been pride on his face. And Sarah Miller, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Miller, the ghost medic, the woman they called Grandma and treated like a janitor, returned the salute with a precision that came from 20 years of service, 15 deployments, and 1,000 moments just like this one. Thank you for your service, ma'am, Reynolds said. To me, to all of us. It was my honor, Commander, Sarah said, and realized she meant it. When Reynolds finally sat back down, shaking from the effort, the head nurse, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, approached Sarah with something like awe on her face. I've been a nurse for 22 years, she said quietly, and I have never in my entire career seen anything like what you did tonight. She extended her hand. Welcome back, Lieutenant Colonel. We're honored to have you. Sarah shook her hand and felt the weight of 3 years of invisibility finally lift. She wasn't nobody anymore. She never had been. Subscribe if this story gave you chills. This is what happens when you underestimate the quiet ones. Share this with someone who needs to remember their power. Drop your country in the comments. Let's show the world that heroes come in all forms.